The shed door splinters open. 6 shadows surround them. Jesse's back presses against Dalton's chest. Trapped. A familiar voice cuts through darkness. Found you. Dalton's hand tightens on his rifle. One wrong move and everything they've hidden crumbles. Tonight, silence ends in blood or exile. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to click subscribe. The summer heat pressed down on Crowley Ranch like a hand against bare skin. Dust hung in the air, golden and thick, catching the late afternoon light until everything seemed to glow. Jesse Kern was 22 years old and had been working at Crowley Ranch for exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of keeping his head down, his voice quiet, his eyes on his work. 3 weeks of pretending he didn't notice Dalton Reeves watching him from across the yard. Dalton was the foreman, 34, broad as a barn door, with hands that could gentle a spooked mare or break a man's jaw with equal ease. His voice carried across the ranch like distant thunder, commanding without ever rising to a shout. When he looked at you, really looked, it felt like standing too close to a forge. On Crowley Ranch, what Dalton Reeves said was law. And Dalton had been watching Jesse since the moment he arrived, dusty and desperate, asking for any work that needed doing. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the mountains when Jesse finished with the last stall. His shirt clung to his back, damp and uncomfortable. Hay dust itched against his skin. His hands ached from gripping the pitchfork, blisters forming where calluses hadn't yet hardened. But the work was done. The horses fed and watered, the tack cleaned and hung properly on the wall. He stepped out into the fading light, squinting against the gold that still burned in the western sky. The other hands had already headed to the bunkhouse, their laughter and rough voices carrying on the evening breeze. Jesse moved to follow, eager for the basin of cold water waiting there, for the chance to scrub away the day's accumulated grime. Kern. The voice stopped him mid-step, deep, resonant, with something in it that made Jesse's pulse quicken for reasons he didn't want to examine too closely. He turned slowly, hands still gripping the pitchfork he'd forgotten he was carrying. Dalton stood in the shadow of the barn, one shoulder against the weathered wood, arms crossed over his chest. The position should have been casual, relaxed. Instead, it felt deliberate, calculated, like a predator deciding whether to pounce or wait. "Sir." Jesse's voice came out rougher than intended. He cleared his throat, tried again. "Something you need?" "Drop the pitchfork. Come here." Not a request. Never a request with Dalton. Jesse leaned the tool against the stable wall, wiped his palms on his pants, and crossed the distance between them. 10 feet. 8. 6. Close enough to see the line of stubble along Dalton's jaw, the way his eyes caught the dying light and held it. Close enough to smell leather and horse and something else, something warm and distinctly human that made Jesse's mouth go dry. "You missed a spot." Jesse blinked, confusion breaking through the strange tension that had settled over him like a wool blanket in summer. "Sir?" Dalton pushed off from the barn wall, and suddenly the space between them evaporated. He was taller than Jesse by half a head, broader by measure that made Jesse feel slight, almost fragile. One hand lifted, and Jesse's breath caught as Dalton reached toward him. Fingers brushed his collarbone, just above where his shirt hung open. The touch lasted only a moment, but it burned like a brand. When Dalton's hand retreated, there was a piece of straw between his fingers. "Missed a spot," he repeated, voice low, almost amused. Jesse couldn't breathe properly. The air had turned thick, heavy. His heart hammered against his ribs. He managed a nod, not trusting his voice. Dalton's eyes held his for a long moment. In that gaze, Jesse saw something that made his knees weak. Recognition, understanding. A question that hadn't been asked aloud. "You're a hard worker," Dalton said, voice still low. "Quiet, don't cause trouble." "Just trying to do right by the job, sir." "Dalton." The correction was firm. "When it's just us, you call me Dalton." The implication settled over Jesse. When it's just us, as though there would be more moments like this. "I notice things, Jesse." The use of his first name felt weighted. "I notice when a man keeps to himself, when he works twice as hard as necessary, when his hands shake just a little when I speak to him. Jesse's mouth had gone dry. I notice, Dalton continued, when a man can't quite meet my eyes, when he startles every time I come near. The words hung between them. Jesse wanted to deny it, wanted to run. Instead, he stood frozen. Dalton stepped closer. Jesse's back hit the barn wall. "Easy," Dalton murmured, something almost gentle in his tone. "I'm not gonna hurt you, boy." The endearment settled over him like a hand on the back of his neck, simultaneously comforting and controlling. "I know what it's like," Dalton continued, barely above a whisper. "To be alone, to keep secrets that burn holes through your chest, to look at something you want and know the world says you can't have it." Jesse's breath came in shallow gasps. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see you, Jesse Kern, all of you, and I'm done pretending I don't." The sun had nearly set, painting the sky crimson and purple. Shadows stretched long across the yard. Anyone could round the corner, could see them standing too close. "I should go," Jesse managed, though his body refused to move. "Should you?" Dalton's hand came up, settling against the barn beside Jesse's head. "Or do you want to stay? Want to stop running from what's right in front of you?" Jesse closed his eyes, dizzy. "I'm scared." "Good." Dalton's response surprised him. "Fear means you understand what's at stake. But fear can't be all you feel, Jesse, or you wouldn't still be standing here." He was right. Jesse should have walked away, should have done anything except stand paralyzed, caught between terror and longing. "What do you want from me?" Dalton's expression softened. "Tonight, nothing. Just wanted you to know you're not alone in this. That what you're feeling, I feel it too." Relief and panic warred in Jesse's chest. The others see what I want them to see. A foreman working his new hand hard. Nothing more." Dalton's hand dropped from the wall. "But what happens between you and me when the sun goes down? That's nobody's business but ours. I don't understand what you're asking." "I'm not asking anything, not yet." Dalton stepped back. "I'm just telling you to think about it, about what you want, about whether you're brave enough to take it." With that, Dalton turned and walked away, his gait unhurried, as though the last 10 minutes hadn't just turned Jesse's world inside out. Jesse sagged against the barn wall, legs unsteady. His hands were shaking, his heart still racing. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of the bunkhouse. He should join them, should be one of them, normal, unremarkable, safe. Instead, he stood in the gathering darkness, watching Dalton's back disappear, and felt the weight of inevitability settle over him. The next morning arrived with Jesse tossing on his narrow bunk. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Dalton's face, felt that almost touch, heard that deep voice saying, "I see you." Dalton was already in the yard, distributing assignments. His eyes passed over Jesse without pause, professional, distant. "Kern," Dalton called out, "you're with me today. North pasture fence needs mending." Jesse caught the sympathetic look from Miguel and the smirk from Cutter. "Yes, sir," Jesse replied. They loaded supplies into a wagon in silence. The ride took nearly an hour. Dalton drove and Jesse sat beside him, conscious of every inch between them. Neither spoke. The silence stretched taut as fence wire. When they reached the damaged fence, Dalton set the brake. They worked side by side, pulling out rotted posts, digging new holes. The work was hard, honest. Jesse found himself hyper-aware of Dalton's presence, of muscles shifting beneath his shirt, of the sound of his breathing. "You're distracted," Dalton said finally. Jesse nearly dropped his hammer. "No, sir, I'm Dalton." The correction was sharp. "I told you, when it's just us. Just us." Jesse swallowed. "I'm fine, Dalton." Liar. The accusation was delivered without heat, almost fondly. Jesse's head snapped up, and he found Dalton watching him with that same intense focus from last night. "Did you think about it?" Dalton asked. "What I said?" "I didn't think about anything else." And I don't know what you want me to say." "Jesse, set down the hammer. I don't know what this is, what you're asking for." "If someone finds out," Dalton finished, "if the old man decides we're not worth the trouble, If the other hands figure it out, yes, all of that. Dalton closed the distance. This time, there was no barn wall at Jesse's back, just open pasture and sky, and the man who'd been haunting his thoughts. I've been alone a long time, Jesse. I learned to bury what I felt, to pretend. I got good at pretending. So good I almost believed it myself. Jesse wanted to look away, couldn't. What changed? You showed up, stood in this yard with dust on your boots and desperation in your eyes, asking for work. And I took one look at you and knew you were like me, knew you were running from something, same as I was running, knew that if I sent you away, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. You don't know me, don't I? Dalton's hand lifted, hovering near Jesse's face but not quite touching. I know you left somewhere in a hurry. I know you work yourself to exhaustion because you're afraid if you stop, you'll have to think. I know you watch me when you think I'm not looking. Jesse's throat tightened. I can't. People like us don't get happy endings. Maybe not. But we get moments. Stolen hours. Is that enough? I don't know. But I know I'm tired of being alone, Jesse. Tired of pretending. And if there's even a chance that you might feel the same. I do. The words burst from Jesse before he could stop them. God help me, I do. But I'm terrified. Not just of what could happen to us, but of this. Of wanting something I've spent my whole life being told is wrong. Dalton's thumb traced the line of Jesse's jaw. Nothing about this feels wrong to me. Dangerous, yes. Complicated, absolutely. But wrong, no. What if I'm not? What if I can't? Jesse struggled to articulate the fear in his chest. I've never, with anyone. I know. I can tell. The way you startle when I get close. That's part of what drew me to you. That innocence. Makes me want to take care of you. Show you things. Teach you. The words sent heat spiraling through Jesse's body. Teach me what? Dalton's smile was slow, knowing. How to stop being afraid. How to want without shame. How to let yourself feel good without thinking you need to be punished for it. Jesse's breath came faster. They were standing too close. Anyone could ride by. But the rational part of Jesse's brain had gone quiet. I'm not making any promises, Dalton continued. Can't guarantee we won't get caught. All I can tell you is that for however long we have, I'll make sure you never regret taking this chance. I'll protect you, Jesse. And who protects you? Jesse asked. The question caught Dalton off guard. Something vulnerable crossed his features. Nobody's ever asked me that before. I'm asking now. Dalton studied him for a long moment. Finally he spoke, voice quiet. Maybe you could, if you wanted to, if you stayed. The weight of that statement settled over Jesse. Not a demand, an invitation, a hope, a vulnerability offered in exchange for his own. I want to stay, Jesse heard himself say. I'm terrified, but I want to stay. Dalton's expression transformed, relief flooding his features. Then stay. We'll figure out the rest as we go. They returned to work, but the silence now felt companionable rather than tense. As the sun climbed higher, Jesse felt something shift inside him. The constant anxiety hadn't disappeared, but it had been joined by something else. Hope. When they finished the fence line and loaded the tools back into the wagon, their hands brushed. This time, Jesse didn't pull away. Dalton's fingers closed around his for just a moment, a pressure so brief it might have been accidental. But Jesse felt the intention behind it, the promise. And when they climbed back onto the wagon seat for the long ride back to the ranch, Jesse no longer flinched when their shoulders touched. The sun was beginning its descent when they rolled back into the yard. The other hands were finishing their own tasks, calling out to each other, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. Dalton pulled the wagon to a stop near the barn and climbed down, all business once more. Good work today, Kern, he said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Professional, distant, exactly what was expected. Then quieter, for Jesse's ears only. Meet me tonight, hour after lights out. The old equipment shed past the south barn. Nobody goes there after dark. Jesse's heart leaped into his throat. This was real then. Not just words spoken in the isolation of the north pasture, but an actual plan. A deliberate step toward whatever this thing between them was becoming. "I'll be there," he managed, voice steady despite the riot of emotions churning through him. Dalton gave a brief nod and walked away, his posture relaxed, nothing in his bearing suggesting anything unusual had transpired. Jesse watched him go, then turned to unhitch the horses, his hands trembling slightly as he worked the buckles and straps. The hours between then and midnight crawled by with agonizing slowness. Dinner in the bunkhouse was the usual affair. Rough jokes, complaints about the heat, speculation about which hands might get picked for the cattle drive to Abilene next month. Jesse pushed food around his plate, barely tasting it, hyper-aware of every minute that ticked past. Miguel caught his eye across the table, concern creasing his weathered face. "You feeling all right, Jesse? You look peaked." "Just tired," Jesse managed. "Long day mending fence." Cutter snorted from his end of the table. "Dalton work you hard? Man's got no mercy, everyone knows that. Probably trying to see if you'll quit." "I'm not quitting," Jesse said, more forcefully than intended. Cutter's eyes narrowed. "Touchy. Must have really gotten under your skin." "If only you knew," Jesse thought, but kept his expression neutral. "Just don't like people assuming I can't handle the work." The conversation moved on, and Jesse slipped back into silence, counting down the minutes. When the lamps were finally extinguished and the bunkhouse settled into the rhythmic breathing of sleeping men, Jesse lay rigid in his bunk, waiting for the right moment. "An hour," Dalton had said. Jesse counted it out in his head, marking time by the church bells that drifted from town when the wind was right. When he was certain enough time had passed, he slipped from his bunk, moving with painstaking care to avoid waking anyone. His boots were in his hands. He'd put them on once he was outside. The night air hit him like a shock, cool after the close heat of the bunkhouse. The ranch was quiet save for the usual sounds, horses shifting in their stalls, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through dry grass. Jesse pulled on his boots and made his way through shadows toward the south barn. The equipment shed sat beyond it, half hidden by a stand of cottonwood trees. It was old, rarely used, home to rusted tools and broken tack that nobody had gotten around to fixing. Jesse had been past it a few times during his weeks at the ranch, but never thought much about it. Now, approaching it in darkness, his heart hammering against his ribs, it took on new significance. The door was slightly ajar. Jesse slipped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the deeper darkness. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the walls, creating bars of silver across the dusty floor. He could make out shapes, a broken plow, stacks of crates, old harnesses hanging from nails. "You came." Jesse spun toward the voice. Dalton emerged from the shadows in the back corner, his face half hidden in darkness. He'd removed his hat, and his hair was slightly disheveled, as though he'd been running his hands through it. "I said I would," Jesse replied, pleased that his voice didn't shake. Dalton moved closer, and in the dim light, Jesse could see the tension in his posture, the careful control. "I wasn't sure. Thought maybe once you had time to think, once the sun went down and reality set in, you'd change your mind." "I almost did." Honesty seemed important here, in this secret space they'd carved out of darkness and risk. A dozen times between the pasture and now, I almost convinced myself to stay in my bunk, to pretend today never happened. "But you're here." "I'm here," Jesse confirmed, taking a step closer. The space between them felt like a chasm and no distance at all. "I'm terrified, but I'm here." Dalton reached out slowly, giving Jesse time to pull away if he wanted. When Jesse didn't move, Dalton's hand settled on his shoulder, solid and warm even through the fabric of his shirt. "We don't have to do anything," Dalton said quietly. "Can just talk if that's what you need. Get to know each other beyond work orders and fence posts. There's no rush, Jesse. No expectations." The gentleness in his voice made something in Jesse's chest crack open. All his life he'd been running, from his father's anger, from the town's judgment, from his own desires. Always moving, never still, never safe. But here, in this forgotten shed with this dangerous man, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. "Peace. Tell me about you," Jesse said. "Not the foreman. You." Dalton's hand slid from Jesse's shoulder down his arm, coming to rest at his elbow. The touch was grounding, anchoring. "Not much to tell, that's interesting. Grew up on a ranch in Texas. Learned to work cattle before I learned to read properly. Came out west after my pa died, looking for something different. somewhere I could be my own man. How long have you known about yourself? Long as I can remember. Dalton's thumb traced small circles on Jesse's arm, probably without realizing he was doing it. Tried to pray it away when I was young. Tried to ignore it. Tried to force myself to want what I was supposed to want. Kissed a girl once at a church social when I was 16. She was pretty enough, sweet, everything a man should want. I felt nothing. Worse than nothing. Felt like I was lying to her and myself. Never tried again after that. Jesse absorbed this, finding strange comfort in Dalton's matter-of-fact tone. Doesn't it make you angry? That we have to hide, pretend, sneak around like criminals? Every day. The response was immediate, fierce. Makes me furious sometimes, the unfairness of it. But anger won't change the world we live in, Jesse. Can only change how we navigate it, how we find joy where we can, how we protect each other. Have there been others? The question emerged before Jesse could stop it, and he immediately wanted to take it back. I'm sorry. That's not my business. She. Dalton's other hand came up, fingers pressing gently against Jesse's lips. The touch sent electricity racing through his system. You can ask me anything. Honesty's all we've got between us. Yes, there have been others. Not many, and never anything that lasted. A cowhand who moved on after a season. A shopkeeper's son in a town 2 days' ride from here, back when I worked a different ranch. Quick encounters, nothing deep, nothing real. Just needing to not be alone for a little while. Jesse nodded, understanding more than he wanted to admit. The loneliness that drove men to risk everything for a moment's connection. He'd felt it gnawing at him since he was old enough to understand he was different, since he realized the ache in his chest when he looked at certain men wasn't the same ache his friends felt looking at women. I've never, Jesse started, then stopped, embarrassed. I know. Dalton's hand dropped from Jesse's mouth, settling instead on his other arm, so they stood loosely connected, facing each other in the darkness. Like I said, I can tell. Doesn't bother me if that's what you're worried about. If anything, makes me want to take even more care. Make sure your first time with someone is, he paused, searching for words, is what it should be, not rushed or shameful or full of regret. Heat flooded Jesse's face, and he was grateful for the darkness that hid his reaction. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted. Any of this. I don't know how to... what to... Hey! Dalton's voice went soft, tender. You don't need to know anything. That's not what tonight is about. Tonight's just about being here, being honest, letting yourself want without punishment. Everything else, we'll figure it out together, at whatever pace feels right. Could be weeks before we do more than talk. Could be longer. I meant what I said, Jesse. No expectations. Relief and disappointment warred in Jesse's chest. Part of him wanted to slow down, to process everything that was happening. But another part, the part that had been denied and repressed his entire life, wanted to run headlong into this, wanted to know what it felt like to be wanted, to be touched, to give in to desires he'd been taught to fear. What if I want expectations? The words escaped before courage could fail him. What if I want more than talking? Dalton went very still. Jesse could feel the tension radiating off him, could sense the war of control and desire playing out in that powerful frame. When Dalton spoke, his voice had roughened, deepened. You need to be sure, Jesse. Once we cross certain lines, we can't uncross them. I need you to be absolutely certain this is what you want, not just what you think you should want, because we're here and the moment feels right. Jesse took a breath, then another. His pulse thundered in his ears. Every rational thought screamed at him to slow down, to be cautious, to protect himself. But standing here in the darkness with Dalton's hands on his arms and possibility hanging in the air like smoke, Jesse found he was tired of being careful, tired of protecting himself from living. I'm sure, he said, and meant it. I'm scared, but I'm sure. I want to know what it's like. I want... He trailed off, not quite having words for the ache inside him, the yearning that had been building since the moment Dalton first looked at him with recognition in his eyes. "Tell me." Dalton's hands tightened on his arms, not painfully, but with intent. "Tell me what you want, Jesse. Use your words." The command in Dalton's voice sent a shiver down Jesse's spine. This was the foreman, the man who commanded a ranch with nothing but presence and will. But now that authority was focused entirely on Jesse, demanding honesty, demanding vulnerability. "I want you to touch me," Jesse whispered, the words feeling like a confession and a prayer. "I want to know what it feels like to be wanted by someone like you. I want to stop being afraid just for tonight. I want—" His voice cracked. "I want to belong to someone." The last admission hung between them, naked and raw. Jesse had revealed the deepest truth of himself, not just desire, but the desperate need to be claimed, to be chosen, to matter to someone in ways that went beyond the physical. Dalton made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between a growl and a groan. "Jesse," he breathed, and there was something like wonder in his voice. "Boy, you don't know what you're offering me." "Then show me," Jesse challenged, finding boldness he didn't know he possessed. "Teach me. Isn't that what you said, that you wanted to teach me?" "Careful," Dalton warned, but there was heat in his voice now, the careful control beginning to fray. "You keep talking like that, and I might forget about going slow." "Maybe I don't want slow." Jesse stepped closer, eliminating the last bit of distance between them. He could feel Dalton's heat now, could hear the slight unevenness in his breathing. "Maybe I'm tired of being careful. Maybe I want to know what it's like to let go." For a moment, Dalton didn't move, didn't breathe. Then with deliberate slowness, he raised one hand to Jesse's face, cupping his jaw. The touch was everything. Rough calluses against Jesse's skin, the strength in those fingers, the tenderness in the way they held him as though he were something precious. "Once we start," Dalton said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I won't want to stop. I'll want everything you're willing to give, and probably more. I'll want to mark you, claim you, make sure anyone who looks at you knows you're taken. Can you handle that, Jesse? Can you handle being mine?" The possessiveness in those words should have frightened Jesse. Instead, it sent liquid heat pouring through his veins, pooling in his belly, making his knees weak. The idea of belonging to someone, of being claimed and wanted and protected, it was everything he'd never let himself imagine. "Yes," he breathed, "please. Yes." Dalton's control snapped. Jesse felt it in the way those fingers tightened on his jaw, in the way Dalton pulled him closer, in the low sound that rumbled from his chest. And then Dalton was kissing him, and Jesse's world exploded into sensation. He'd imagined kisses before, late at night when shame couldn't quite reach him. But nothing had prepared him for the reality. The firm pressure of Dalton's mouth against his, the scratch of stubble, the heat and taste of another person. Jesse froze, overwhelmed, unsure what to do with his hands, with his mouth, with the sudden flood of feeling threatening to drown him. Dalton pulled back slightly, breathing hard. "Easy," he murmured against Jesse's lips. "Just feel. Don't think. Let me guide you." Then he was kissing Jesse again, slower this time, coaxing rather than claiming. His hand slid from Jesse's jaw to the back of his neck, fingers threading through hair, holding him steady. His other arm wrapped around Jesse's waist, pulling him fully against that solid chest, letting Jesse feel every inch of contact between them. Jesse melted into it, his hands coming up to clutch at Dalton's shirt, needing something to anchor him as the world tilted sideways. Dalton's mouth moved against his, teaching him the rhythm, showing him how to open, how to respond. When Dalton's tongue touched his lower lip, Jesse gasped, and Dalton took advantage, deepening the kiss until Jesse couldn't tell where one of them ended and the other began. Time became meaningless. It might have been seconds or hours that they stood there, learning each other, breaking apart only to come back together. Dalton's hands mapped Jesse's body through his clothes, his shoulders, his back, his waist, never straying to more intimate territory, but making Jesse hyper-aware of every point of contact. When they finally broke apart for air, Jesse was shaking, his knees barely supporting him. Dalton held him upright, one arm still wrapped securely around his waist. God, Jesse managed, his voice wrecked. Is it always like that? Dalton's laugh was low, intimate. No, it's not. What just happened? That's rare, Jesse. That kind of connection, that intensity. Most kisses are just, he searched for words. Physical, mechanical. This was something else. Jesse's heart swelled at the admission. He wasn't alone in feeling overwhelmed then. Dalton, experienced and confident, had been affected too. I want more, Jesse said, emboldened by darkness and desire. I want everything you'll give me. Dalton's grip on him tightened. Not here, not tonight. I'm barely holding on as it is, and I promised myself I'd do this right with you. You deserve better than a dusty equipment shed for your first time. Disappointment flooded through Jesse, sharp and unexpected. But, listen to me. Dalton's voice carried the weight of command, cutting through Jesse's protest. What I want to do to you, what I want to show you, it requires time, privacy, a real bed, not dirt and old tack. I want to take my time with you, Jesse. Want to learn every sound you make, every place that makes you tremble. Can't do that properly here, with the constant fear of being discovered. The words painted pictures in Jesse's mind, made promises his body responded to with embarrassing eagerness. When? Then? Soon. Dalton pressed another kiss to Jesse's forehead, tender and chaste. There's an old line shack about 2 hours' ride from here. Used it when I first started at the ranch, before I got my own quarters. Nobody goes there anymore. This Saturday, I'll find a reason to send you out checking fence lines in that direction. You'll spend the night there, and I'll join you after I'm sure everyone's settled for the evening. Jesse's breath caught. A whole night. Hours of privacy, of possibility. I can wait until Saturday. Good. Dalton stepped back, and the loss of contact made Jesse want to protest. We should go. Can't risk someone noticing we're both gone. Jesse nodded, though leaving felt like tearing away from something essential. They moved to the door, and Dalton peered out, checking that the coast was clear. Before he could slip outside, Jesse caught his arm. Dalton? The foreman turned back, eyebrows raised in question. Thank you. For tonight. For seeing me. For... Jesse struggled to find words for the enormity of what had shifted between them. For everything. Dalton's expression softened. He reached out, squeezed Jesse's shoulder once. Get some sleep, Jesse, and try not to overthink things. What we have, what we're building. It's good. It's right. Don't let fear poison it. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows with practiced ease. Jesse waited a few minutes before following, his lips still tingling, his heart still racing, his entire body alive with anticipation for Saturday. The days that followed settled into a pattern both comforting and excruciating. By day, Jesse and Dalton maintained careful distance, their interactions limited to work-related discussions and the occasional brush of hands when passing tools. But at night, Jesse would lie awake and replay every moment from the equipment shed. Every word Dalton had spoken, every touch that had made him feel alive in ways he'd never experienced. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Dalton's fingers worked slowly, methodically, unfastening each button of Jesse's shirt with deliberate care. The fabric parted gradually, revealing skin that had never been touched with intention, never been seen as anything but functional. Jesse stood trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of anticipation, from the vulnerability of being seen. When the shirt finally hung open, Dalton didn't immediately remove it. Instead, his hands settled on Jesse's shoulders, thumbs tracing the line of his collarbones. The touch was feather-light, exploratory, as though Dalton was memorizing the landscape of Jesse's body through his fingertips. "You're shaken," Dalton observed, his voice soft in the darkness. "I'm nervous," Jesse admitted. Nobody's ever. I know." Dalton's hands slid down Jesse's arms, pushing the shirt from his shoulders. It pooled on the floor, forgotten. "That's why we're taking this slow. Why I'm going to spend tonight teaching you what it feels like to be touched, to be appreciated, to be wanted for more than just what you can do with your hands. Jesse's breath hitched as Dalton's palms settled on his bare chest, warm and solid. The simple contact sent electricity racing through his nervous system, made his skin feel too tight, too sensitive. Dalton's thumbs brushed across his chest, and Jesse gasped, his eyes flying wide. "Sensitive," Dalton murmured, approval coloring his tone. "That's good. Means you'll feel everything more intensely. Means I can make you come apart with just my hands." The promise in those words made Jesse's knees buckle slightly. Dalton caught him, steadied him, then guided him backward toward the narrow bed in the corner. Jesse went willingly, unable to think beyond the heat of Dalton's hands on his skin, the dark intensity in his eyes. "Sit," Dalton commanded, and Jesse obeyed, sinking onto the edge of the mattress. Dalton remained standing, looking down at him with an expression that was part predator, part protector. "I'm going to ask you questions, and you're going to answer honestly. No shame, no hiding. Just truth between us. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Jesse whispered, his voice barely audible. "Have you ever touched yourself?" The question was direct, shameless, and it made Jesse's face flame with embarrassment. He wanted to look away, wanted to lie, but Dalton had asked for honesty. "Yes," he admitted, the words scraping out of his throat. "How often?" Jesse squirmed, humiliation warring with arousal. It depends. Sometimes every night, sometimes I'd go weeks trying not to, trying to be good." "There's nothing bad about it," Dalton interrupted gently. "Nothing shameful about wanting pleasure, about giving yourself relief. You understand that, right? Your body's natural urges aren't sins to be punished." Jesse nodded, though years of conditioning made it hard to truly believe. "I know. In my head I know. But I was raised to think. They told us that men who felt those things about other men were wrong, broken, damned," Dalton supplied, his voice hardening. "I know what they told you, Jesse. They told me the same things. Took me years to stop believing their poison. But I'm here to tell you different. What you feel, what you want, who you're drawn to. There's nothing wrong with any of it. You're perfect exactly as you are." Tears pricked at Jesse's eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. Nobody had ever said those words to him before. Nobody had ever looked at him the way Dalton was looking at him now, with acceptance, with desire, with something that looked dangerously close to affection. "When you touched yourself," Dalton continued, kneeling so they were at eye level, "what did you think about?" Jesse's throat worked, his face burning. "I tried not to think about anything specific. Tried to just get it over with. But sometimes..." He broke off, unable to continue. "Sometimes what?" Dalton's hand came up to cup Jesse's jaw, forcing him to maintain eye contact. "Tell me, Jesse, what did you think about in those moments when you let yourself really feel?" "Men," Jesse confessed, the word feeling like it had been torn from his chest. "Strong men, men who would..." He struggled to articulate fantasies he'd barely let himself acknowledge. "Men who would take control. Who would tell me what to do, who would make me feel safe," Dalton finished for him. "Wanted, cared for?" Jesse nodded miserably. "I know it's wrong to want that, to want someone to..." "There's nothing wrong with it," Dalton said firmly. "Nothing wrong with wanting to submit, with wanting someone stronger to take care of you, to make decisions so you don't have to carry everything alone. That's not weakness, Jesse. That's trust. That's courage." The words settled over Jesse like a benediction, absolving him of guilt he'd carried for years. "Really? Really?" Dalton's thumb traced Jesse's lower lip, and Jesse's eyes fluttered closed at the intimacy of it. "And I'm going to show you what it's like to have that. To give yourself over to someone who'll treasure what you're offering, who'll protect you even as they push your boundaries." Jesse's breath came faster now, shallow and uneven. "I want that. I want you to show me." "I will." Dalton stood, and Jesse immediately felt the loss of his proximity. "But first, you're going to take off your boots and pants. Everything except your drawers. Can you do that for me?" The command was clear, brooking no argument. Jesse's hands moved to his boots, fumbling with the laces. His fingers felt clumsy, uncoordinated, but he managed to unlace them and kick them off. Then his hands went to his belt, and he hesitated, suddenly acutely aware of how exposed he was about to be. "Jesse." Dalton's voice cut through his anxiety. "Look at me." Jesse's eyes snapped up. Dalton stood a few feet away, his own shirt now unbuttoned, revealing the muscled chest beneath. The sight made Jesse's mouth go dry, made heat pool low in his belly. "I'm right here with you," Dalton said. "Not going to judge you, not going to mock you, not going to think less of you for anything I see. You trust me?" "Yes, sir," Jesse breathed. "Then show me. Let me see you." Jesse's hands moved with more confidence now, unbuckling his belt, unbuttoning his pants, pushing them down his legs. He stepped out of them, standing in nothing but his thin cotton drawers, and forced himself not to cover up, not to hide. Dalton's gaze raked over him, hot and appreciative. "God, Jesse, you have no idea how beautiful you are, how perfect." The praise made Jesse's chest tight, made him stand a little straighter despite his embarrassment. Dalton closed the distance between them, his hands settling on Jesse's hips, burning through the thin fabric. "Now," Dalton said, his voice dropping to that commanding register that made Jesse's pulse race. "You're going to lie back on that bed and let me touch you. You're not going to hide, not going to second guess, not going to worry about anything except how it feels. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Jesse managed, his voice shaky with anticipation. He climbed onto the narrow bed, the thin mattress creaking under his weight. The sheets were rough against his bare skin, and he felt exposed, vulnerable, more naked than he'd ever felt in his life despite still wearing his drawers. Dalton followed, the bed dipping under his greater weight, and suddenly they were sharing the small space, bodies inches apart. Dalton propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at Jesse with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. His free hand settled on Jesse's chest again, palm flat against his racing heart. "Feel that?" Dalton asked. "That's excitement, anticipation. Your body knows what it wants, even if your mind's still catching up." His hand began to move, sliding down Jesse's chest, across his stomach, mapping territory that had never been explored by another person. Jesse bit his lip, fighting the urge to squirm, to grab Dalton's wrist and either push it away or pull it lower. He wasn't sure which. "Breathe," Dalton instructed. "Just breathe and feel. Don't think about what comes next. Don't worry about doing anything right or wrong. This isn't a test, Jesse. This is just me learning what makes you respond, what makes you gasp, what makes you melt." His fingers traced patterns across Jesse's stomach, dipping below his navel, skating along the waistband of his drawers but never going lower. The teasing touch was maddening, building need to an almost unbearable level. Jesse heard himself whimper, a sound he'd never made before, and Dalton smiled. "That's it," he encouraged. "Let me hear you. Nobody around for miles. You can be as loud as you want. Can let yourself feel without holding back." His hand moved to Jesse's hip, thumb pressing into the hollow there, and Jesse arched involuntarily, seeking more contact. Dalton's smile widened, clearly pleased by the response. "So responsive," he murmured, "so eager. I'm going to enjoy this, Jesse. Enjoy learning every sound you make, every place that drives you wild." Jesse wanted to respond, wanted to say something clever or seductive, but his brain had stopped forming coherent thoughts. All he could do was feel. Dalton's hand on his skin, the heat of his body pressed close, the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. Dalton's hand moved again, this time to Jesse's thigh, fingers trailing up the sensitive inner surface. Jesse's legs fell open without conscious thought, an invitation he barely understood he was offering. Dalton made an approving sound low in his throat. "Good boy," he praised, and Jesse felt that approval like sunshine breaking through clouds. "So willing, so trusting. You have no idea what a gift that is, what you're giving me by letting yourself be vulnerable like this." His fingers traced higher, closer to where Jesse ached for contact, and then withdrew, moving to the other thigh to repeat the maddening exploration. Jesse made a frustrated sound, his hips lifting slightly, seeking. "Not yet," Dalton said firmly. "We're not rushing this. I told you, I'm taking my time with you, going to draw this out until you're begging, until you can't think about anything except how much you need relief. The promise sent a shiver through Jesse's entire body. Please, he heard himself whisper. Dalton, please. What are you asking for, Jesse? Dalton's hand stilled on his thigh. Use your words. Tell me what you need. Jesse's face burned. I need. Touch me. Please touch me. I am touching you, Dalton pointed out, clearly enjoying Jesse's frustration. You know what I mean? Jesse protested, squirming. I need more. Where? Dalton's voice was merciless. Where do you need more, Jesse? Tell me exactly what you want. Jesse wanted to die of embarrassment, but he also needed, more than he'd ever needed anything in his life. Touch me, he finally choked out. Down there. Please, sir. There we go, Dalton praised. That wasn't so hard, was it? Asking for what you want? His hand finally moved to where Jesse ached for contact, pressing against him through the thin fabric of his drawers. Jesse cried out, his back arching off the mattress, overwhelmed by the sensation. It was so much more intense than his own touch, so much better than anything he'd experienced alone in the dark. Dalton's hand was confident, knowing exactly how to move, how much pressure to apply. That's it, Dalton encouraged, his voice rough now, affected despite his control. Let go, Jesse. Let yourself feel good. You deserve this, deserve to be touched, deserve to experience pleasure without shame. His hand worked with steady purpose, building sensation until Jesse thought he might shatter. The pressure built and built, waves of heat rolling through his body, and he heard himself making sounds, gasps and whimpers and half-formed pleas that might have embarrassed him if he'd had any capacity left for embarrassment. Look at me, Dalton commanded, and Jesse's eyes flew open, locking onto Dalton's intense gaze. I want to see your face when you fall apart. Want to watch you come undone. The combination of Dalton's hand, his words, his eyes burning into Jesse's was too much. Jesse felt the peak approaching, unstoppable as an avalanche, and then he was over the edge, crying out, his body convulsing with the force of release. Wave after wave of sensation crashed over him, more intense than anything he'd ever felt. And through it all, Dalton's hand never stopped moving, drawing out every last tremor of pleasure. When Jesse finally came back to himself, gasping and trembling, he found Dalton watching him with an expression of deep satisfaction. His hand had gentled, but remained, grounding, reassuring. Good boy, Dalton murmured, and the praise made Jesse's chest tight with emotion. So beautiful when you let go. Did so well for me. Jesse couldn't speak, could barely think. His body felt boneless, melted into the mattress, every nerve ending still singing. Dalton withdrew his hand, and Jesse immediately mourned the loss of contact. Stay right there, Dalton instructed, climbing off the bed. He moved to the pump in the corner, wetting a cloth, then returned to gently clean Jesse up, his movements tender despite the intimacy of the action. Jesse's face burned with renewed embarrassment, but Dalton shushed him. Nothing to be ashamed of. This is part of it, part of taking care of you. Let me do this. When he'd finished, he tossed the cloth aside and climbed back onto the bed, gathering Jesse into his arms. Jesse went willingly, pressing his face against Dalton's chest, inhaling the scent of him, leather and horse and something uniquely masculine. Thank you, Jesse whispered against Dalton's shirt. For what? For making it. For making me feel. Jesse struggled to find words for the enormity of what had just happened. For not making me feel ashamed. Dalton's arms tightened around him. Never going to make you feel shame for this, for wanting me, for taking pleasure. That's not what this is about, Jesse. This is about showing you that you're worthy of care, of attention, of someone taking time to make you feel good. They lay together in the darkness, the fire having burned down to glowing embers. Jesse's breathing gradually slowed, his body relaxing completely for the first time in memory. He felt safe here, wrapped in Dalton's arms, sheltered from a world that would condemn them for this moment of connection. "What about you?" Jesse finally asked, becoming aware that, while he'd found release, Dalton remained unsatisfied. "Don't you want... Shouldn't I?" "Tonight was about you," Dalton interrupted. "About showing you what it feels like to be on the receiving end, to let someone else take care of your needs. We'll get to the rest eventually, but there's no rush. No scoreboard we're keeping." Jesse absorbed this, grateful for Dalton's patience even as part of him wanted to reciprocate, wanted to make Dalton feel as good as he'd made Jesse feel. "I want to learn," he said quietly. "I want to know how to please you." "You please me just by being here," Dalton said, pressing a kiss to the top of Jesse's head. "By trusting me enough to be vulnerable, by letting me see you like this. That's more than enough for tonight." Jesse nodded against his chest, accepting the answer even as his mind raced with questions, with curiosity about what else existed between them, what other pleasures might be waiting to be discovered. But Dalton was right. They had time. The night stretched ahead of them, and beyond that, days and weeks of stolen moments, of learning each other in the shadows where judgment couldn't reach. "Tell me about your family," Dalton said after a long silence. "About why you left. Why you showed up at Crowley Ranch with nothing but the clothes on your back." Jesse stiffened, the question bringing unwelcome memories. But Dalton's arms remained steady around him, and the afterglow of pleasure made it easier to speak truths he usually kept locked away. "My father was a preacher," Jesse began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fire and brimstone type, always going on about sin and damnation. My mother died when I was young. Fever took her one winter. After that, it was just me and him, and he got stricter, meaner. Everything was a sin. Everything was a test from God." Dalton's hand moved in soothing circles on Jesse's back, encouraging him to continue. "When I was 16, he caught me looking at the blacksmith's apprentice. Just looking, nothing more. But he saw something in my face that gave me away. He beat me so bad I couldn't walk for a week. Made me pray for hours on end. Told me I was an abomination." Jesse's voice cracked. "I tried to change, tried to be what he wanted, but I couldn't. Every time I looked at a man and felt that pull, I hated myself a little more." "Jesse," Dalton started, but Jesse shook his head, needing to finish now that he'd started. "2 months ago he caught me again. Not looking this time, but there was a traveler passing through town. Stayed at the boarding house for a week. He was kind to me, talked to me like I mattered. Last night before he left, he kissed me. Just once, quick and chaste, but my father saw. He told the whole town, called me names in front of everyone, said I was no son of his." Jesse's chest tightened with the memory of standing in the town square, his father's voice ringing out with accusations while neighbors and friends he'd known his whole life looked at him with disgust and pity. "I left that night," Jesse continued, "took what little money I'd saved, walked until I found a town with a livery that would hire me for a few days. Worked my way west, taking whatever jobs I could find, never staying long enough for anyone to ask questions. When I got to Crowley Ranch and saw they were hiring, I thought maybe I could finally stop running. Thought maybe I could just keep my head down, do my work, be invisible. But you can't be invisible," Dalton said gently. "Not to me. I saw you from the first moment, saw the fear and the loneliness and the desperate need to belong somewhere. That's why I kept watching you, why I couldn't leave you alone. Recognized myself in you, the younger version of me that didn't know yet that there were others like us, that we don't have to be alone." Jesse lifted his head, looking up at Dalton's face in the dim light. "Do you think we're damned?" My father said. He was so sure. "Your father was wrong," Dalton said firmly. "If there's a God, and I'm not saying there is, I don't think he gives a damn who we love or how we find comfort. The real sins are cruelty, hatred, turning your back on someone who needs help. Your father committed those sins when he cast you out. You haven't done anything wrong by being who you are." Jesse wanted to believe him, wanted to let go of the guilt and shame that had been drilled into him since childhood. In this moment, wrapped in Dalton's arms, feeling cherished and protected, it was almost possible to imagine a world where love didn't have to hide, where two men could find solace in each other without fear of discovery. "What about you?" Jesse asked. "Your family, your past, you never talk about it." Dalton was quiet for a long moment, and Jesse wondered if he'd overstepped, if Dalton would close down the way he sometimes did when conversations got too personal. But finally, he spoke, his voice rougher than usual. "My pa was a hard man. Ran the ranch with an iron fist, expected his sons to be just as tough. I was the youngest of 4 boys. My older brothers were everything he wanted. Strong, mean, interested in girls and drinking and proving their masculinity every chance they got. I tried to be like them, but I was always a disappointment. Too quiet, too thoughtful, not aggressive enough." His hand had stopped moving on Jesse's back, tension creeping into his frame. Jesse pressed closer, offering silent support. "When I was 17, one of the ranch hands, his name was Thomas, he figured me out. Don't know how, maybe he was like us too, or maybe I was just obvious. He cornered me one night in the barn, asked me point blank if I liked men. I was terrified, thought he was going to tell my pa, thought my life was over." "What happened?" Jesse asked when Dalton fell silent. "He kissed me, told me he'd known for years what he was, that he'd learned to hide it, to be careful. For 3 months, we snuck around, meeting in secret, teaching each other what it felt like to not be alone. It was the happiest I'd ever been. Thought maybe I'd found a way to survive, to have something for myself even while keeping up the pretense." The past tense of his words sent dread curling through Jesse's stomach. "What happened to him?" "My oldest brother caught us. He beat Thomas nearly to death, then dragged me to my father. They gave me a choice, leave and never come back, or stay and watch Thomas hang for corrupting me." Dalton's voice had gone flat, emotionless in the way of someone recounting trauma they've relived 1,000 times. "I chose to leave. Thought at least that way Thomas might live. I don't know if he did. Never went back, never tried to find out. Been running ever since, working ranches, moving on before anyone could see too much, before I could get attached." Jesse's heart broke for the boy Dalton had been, forced to choose between his own safety and someone he cared about. "I'm sorry, I can't imagine." "It taught me to be careful," Dalton continued, "to never let anyone too close, to keep my desires locked away where they couldn't hurt anyone else. For 16 years I've lived that way. And then you showed up and all that careful control just crumbled. I looked at you and wanted things I'd sworn I'd never want again. Wanted to protect you, teach you, claim you as mine. Selfish as hell, but I couldn't help it." "It's not selfish," Jesse protested. "I wanted it too. Want you." Dalton pulled back slightly, cupping Jesse's face in his hands. "I need you to understand what you're signing up for, Jesse. This thing between us, it can't have a future beyond stolen nights and careful secrets. We can't ever be public. Can't ever have what normal people have. Best we can hope for is moments like this, where we can pretend the world doesn't exist outside these walls." "I know," Jesse said, though the words made his chest ache. "I'm not expecting. I don't need forever, Dalton. I just need to not be alone anymore. Need someone who sees me and doesn't turn away." "I see you," Dalton promised, his thumbs tracing Jesse's cheekbones. "Every part of you, and I'm not turning away. As long as you want me, as long as you're willing to be careful, I'm yours. We'll steal whatever time we can, make the most of these nights together." "And who protects you?" Jesse asked, finding courage he didn't know he possessed. The question seemed to catch Dalton off guard. His hand dropped away from Jesse's face, and for a moment something vulnerable crossed his features. "Nobody's ever asked me that before. I'm asking now." Dalton studied him for a long moment, and Jesse could see the war playing out behind those dark eyes, the instinct to maintain control warring with the desire to be honest, to be seen. Finally he spoke, voice quiet and rough. "Maybe you could, if you wanted to, if you stayed." The weight of that statement settled over Jesse like a mantle. Not a demand, not an order, an invitation, a hope, a vulnerability offered in exchange for his own. "I want to stay," Jesse heard himself say, and knew with absolute certainty that it was true. I'm terrified, but I want to stay. Dalton's expression transformed, relief and something fiercer flooding his features. Then stay. We'll figure out the rest as we go. He stepped back then, putting professional distance between them once more. But the air had changed, charged with new understanding. They returned to work, but the silence now felt companionable rather than tense, a shared secret rather than an uncomfortable void. As the sun climbed higher and sweat soaked through their shirts, Jesse felt something shift inside him. The constant anxiety that had been his companion for years, the fear that kept him isolated and guarded, hadn't disappeared, but it had been joined by something else, something warm and terrifying and exhilarating. Hope. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to face the world alone anymore. When they finished the fence line and loaded the tools back into the wagon, their hands brushed. This time, Jesse didn't pull away. Dalton's fingers closed around his for just a moment, a pressure so brief it might have been accidental. But Jesse felt the intention behind it, the promise. And when they climbed back onto the wagon seat for the long ride back to the ranch, Jesse no longer flinched when their shoulders touched. The sun was beginning its descent when they rolled back into the yard. The other hands were finishing their own tasks, calling out to each other, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. Dalton pulled the wagon to a stop near the barn and climbed down. All business once more. "Good work today, Kern," he said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Professional, distant, exactly what was expected. Then, quieter, for Jesse's ears only. "Meet me tonight, hour after lights out." The old equipment shed past the south barn. Nobody goes there after dark. Jesse's heart leaped into his throat. This was real then. Not just words spoken in the isolation of the north pasture, but an actual plan, a deliberate step toward whatever this thing between them was becoming. "I'll be there," he managed, voice steady despite the riot of emotions churning through him. Dalton gave a brief nod and walked away, his posture relaxed, nothing in his bearing suggesting anything unusual had transpired. Jesse watched him go, then turned to unhitch the horses, his hands trembling slightly as he worked the buckles and straps. The hours between then and midnight crawled by with agonizing slowness. Dinner in the bunkhouse was the usual affair. Rough jokes, complaints about the heat, speculation about which hands might get picked for the cattle drive to Abilene next month. Jesse pushed food around his plate, barely tasting it, hyper-aware of every minute that ticked past. Miguel caught his eye across the table, concern creasing his weathered face. "You feeling all right, Jesse? You look peaked." "Just tired," Jesse managed. "Long day mending fence," Cutter snorted from his end of the table. "Dalton work you hard? Man's got no mercy, everyone knows that. Probably trying to see if you'll quit." "I'm not quitting," Jesse said, more forcefully than intended. Cutter's eyes narrowed. "Touchy. Must have really gotten under your skin. If only you knew," Jesse thought, but kept his expression neutral. "Just don't like people assuming I can't handle the work." The conversation moved on, and Jesse slipped back into silence, counting down the minutes. When the lamps were finally extinguished and the bunkhouse settled into the rhythmic breathing of sleeping men, Jesse lay rigid in his bunk, waiting for the right moment. "An hour," Dalton had said. Jesse counted it out in his head, marking time by the church bells that drifted from town when the wind was right. When he was certain enough time had passed, he slipped from his bunk, moving with painstaking care to avoid waking anyone. His boots were in his hands. He'd put them on once he was outside. The night air hit him like a shock, cool after the close heat of the bunkhouse. The ranch was quiet save for the usual sounds, horses shifting in their stalls, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through dry grass. Jesse pulled on his boots and made his way through shadows toward the south barn. Dawn came too soon, pale light filtering through the grimy windows and pulling Jesse from sleep. For a moment he was disoriented, unsure where he was or why his body felt heavy and sated. Then he became aware of the solid warmth at his back, the arm draped over his waist, and memory flooded back. Dalton. The line shack. Everything that had happened between them in the darkness. Jesse held perfectly still, not wanting to wake the man behind him, wanting to preserve this moment of peace before reality intruded. But Dalton was already awake, his breathing pattern changed, and his arm tightened around Jesse's waist. "Mornin'," Dalton's voice rumbled, rough with sleep. "Morning," Jesse replied, his own voice quiet in the stillness. They lay together as the light gradually strengthened, neither speaking, both aware that the day would bring demands and responsibilities that would tear them apart. Finally, Dalton pressed a kiss to Jesse's shoulder and sat up, the mattress creaking in protest. "We should head back," he said, though his tone suggested he wanted anything but. "Can't both be gone too long without raising suspicions." Jesse nodded, rolling over to face him. In the morning light, Dalton looked tired but content, his hair disheveled, his expression softer than Jesse had ever seen it. "When can we do this again?" "Soon as I can arrange it," Dalton promised, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind Jesse's ear. "Might be a couple weeks before another opportunity comes up, but I'll figure something out. Can you be patient?" "I'll try," Jesse said, though the thought of weeks without this, without Dalton's touch and presence, made his chest tight. They dressed in silence, helping each other with buttons and laces, small intimacies that felt as significant as what they'd shared in the darkness. When they were both fully clothed, returned to the roles of foreman and ranch hand, Dalton pulled Jesse close one last time. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting me, for being brave enough to take this chance. Last night meant more to me than I can say." "For me too," Jesse replied, memorizing the feel of Dalton's arms around him, storing it away for the lonely nights ahead. They left the line shack separately, Dalton first and Jesse following an hour later, making it look like coincidence if anyone happened to be watching. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than the ride out, reality settling over Jesse like a heavy coat. By the time he reached the yard and dismounted, he'd locked away his memories of the night before, buried them deep where casual observation couldn't reach. The other hands greeted him with the usual jibes and questions about how the fence work had gone. Jesse answered easily, falling back into the familiar rhythm of ranch life. And when Dalton appeared in the yard later that afternoon, Jesse kept his eyes down, his expression neutral, giving nothing away. But that night, lying in his narrow bunk with 6 other men snoring around him, Jesse touched his lips and remembered Dalton's hands on his skin, his voice in the darkness, the feeling of being seen and wanted and cherished. And he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever sacrifices they had to make to protect their secret, it was worth it. He had found something worth fighting for, someone worth risking everything for. And in the harsh, unforgiving world of the frontier, that was everything.